School board meetings are business meetings that are open to the public, during which we provide several opportunities for public comment on items before the board. But today we only have one item for a priority discussion, so it'll be one opportunity for public comment, and it will be received after or in conjunction with in conjunction with the priority discussion. Speaking of the priority discussion, tonight's priority discussion is the elementary school site presentation. The action under consideration is that the Board of Directors authorizes the superintendent to extend the due diligence period deadline or terminate the agreement of sale as related to the property on 1200 West Sweetsford Road per the conditions outlined in the agenda materials. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we have a motion that has got a properly moved and seconded, and notwithstanding the resolution itself, we're not just going to be talking about those limited items in the context of this presentation. We'll be, as advertised, talking about the due diligence efforts that the district has been engaging in over the past almost 60 days since the district has entered into the purchase agreement for 1200 West Sweetsford Road. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Gusick, to make the presentation.
Thank you, President Kantorsek. I'm pleased to present tonight with our design team and district officials to the board and to the public status report on that term known as due diligence, right? So when we'd entered that agreement of sale and we announced to the public that we were entering an agreement of sale to look at this property on 1200 West Sweetsford Road, we said there was an important period of 60 days that the district would have an opportunity to send whatever experts deemed necessary onto the property to answer the basic question, is this a suitable place for an elementary school? It's the kind of thing that we wouldn't know when we're purchasing a property. There's a lot of extensive work that's been done, and tonight's presentation is, I'm going to tell you in advance, detailed. I do not know that it will be, in fact, I feel it will not be short. But I feel as though a lot of work has taken place over the last 60 days. Some of it is technical, but we'll be sharing a lot of information with the public about what's been happening and an update. We will also provide, our solicitor will provide an explanation more in detail of the resolution itself and why it's structured the way it is, because without context, it could appear more ominous than we believe it is right now. All that will be explained during the presentation. The board will have an opportunity to ask questions, the public, and then followed by an action. I'd like to introduce our district architect, Matt Heckendorn. On the engineering side, Mike Kissinger, our business manager, Art McDonald, and our director of educational program, Mike Simondera. And we'll be able to, most of the presentation is going to be done by our experts. And we provided this opportunity for them to explain the work that they've been doing to get us to this point. So you might hear some color commentary from us, but primarily it's going to be a presentation from the design team. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Heckendorn. Thank you.
Good evening. My intention this evening is to provide a summary of the due diligence efforts completed by the architecture and engineering team between January 17th and today. So in terms of agenda, we'll be talking really in terms of 4 topics. Due diligence process and findings, followed by concept design, which is really an illustration of initial approach to potential layouts of how a potential 6th elementary school could be located at 1200 Sweetsford Road. Third would be an outline of the regulatory approvals process, and then last, a discussion of project schedule and costs.
I'd like to add one thing before we proceed. The slides that you see today have been working. 60 days is not a lot of time. Changes were made to these slides throughout the day today. We will be making them available for public view, so if you want to actually look at these slides or show them to someone or refer them to them, they'll be separated out and placed on our website as soon as tomorrow. Thank you.
The due diligence findings that we'll be reviewing this evening are the work of many parties. This presentation draws from the efforts of TE School District, of our firm Heckendorn Childs Architects, of Pannoni Associates. As Dr. Gusick mentioned, we're joined by Mike Kissinger, who will be providing some summary updates this evening. Pannoni was engaged from a site survey standpoint, a civil engineering standpoint, and environmental investigation and geotechnical evaluations. There were a number of other specialist consultants who are not with us this evening, but whose work we will be presenting, which includes A.W. Lookup, the district's longtime structural engineer, Schiller and Hirsch, whom is the district's mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer, Terranet, which provides IT consulting and fiber connection consulting, as well as Becker Frondorf, who operated in the capacity of a third-party cost estimator. So to put tonight in context of where we're at in the process, we're near the scheduled date of due diligence. There's really 5 distinct phases of design and construction. There's due diligence, followed by 3 usual and typical industry standard terminology for design phases: schematic design, design development, and construction documentation, all of which are a progression to add more detail into the drawings and specifications and arrive at bid documents, which takes us to the 5th stage, which is bidding and construction. And I think the point of sharing the slide is to ground us in the fact that there are literally thousands of decisions that will need to take place should the project move forward, and this due diligence is really the first milestone in that step. So putting 1200 Swedesford Road on the map within the district, the potential 6th elementary school would be located northwest of Hillside, really in the northwest quadrant of the township. And starting with the first of our 4 topics for this evening, due diligence findings. To summarize the existing property, it includes a 3-story commercial office building. There's parking clustered towards the north, the west, and the south of the property. There's a vehicular loop that exists presently at the north entrance. There's a grass area immediately north of the building that had in past and originally been planned to provide for a second building, which was never developed and never constructed. There's a series of existing stormwater management features, which Mr. Kissinger will speak to later this evening. There's a shared entrance drive off of Swedesford Road, accessing South Point 1, 2, and 3, the current office buildings. And there's also a pond, stormwater management basin, located at the southwest or the lower left of the site. And lastly, in terms of summary of existing site, there's an existing emergency access off of Howville Road, which occurs south or towards the bottom beyond the pond and provides emergency vehicular access over a grass area. I'll now walk us through several photographs which illustrate existing conditions, just to give everyone a better flavor of the current conditions of the site. So this is a view from the north. You see Swedesford Road in the foreground, the main north parking area, and the building beyond. This is then a view from another aerial view, which illustrates South Point 1, existing commercial office building. Swedesford Road is to our right, and Howville is really beyond in the image. This is a view off of Swedesford Road at the existing entrance to this site. So again, this is a shared entrance drive between South Point 3, which is the office building in question, and the adjacent structures. Note that there's an existing median. Note that this is a signalized intersection, a traffic signal intersection. This is then a view at the interior of the site. All of these images have a key plan on the bottom right, which illustrates where the view is taken from. So this is really to the entrance into Swedesford Road proper, at the point where the entrance drives sort of separate between South Point 1 and 2 and South Point 3. This is then a view of the main entrance, the north entrance of 1200 Swedesford Road. a sort of zoomed in version of that entrance. And this is a view at the east, so we're sort of working our way around the building now in a clockwise fashion. So this is a view on the east side. And this is then the perceived rear of the existing building, so adjacent to the south entrance. This is that south entry, continuing to work our way clockwise, and the southwest area. I would note that this, you'll see there's an existing tiered outdoor seating area. Also note at the third floor, there's a little bit of an architectural overhang at the third floor level. This slide illustrates the existing stormwater management pond that we've mentioned. And then slide 19 is an overview of the site features. So I'll ask Mr. Kissinger to give us an overview of the site investigations.
Sure. So as Mr. Heckendorn mentioned previously, Pannoni was engaged to look at a lot of site characteristics, including environmental and geotechnical. And these are a list of a few of the items that we did that are typical during due diligence period. First is the environmental phase 1 assessment. So Pannoni performed their own phase 1 assessment and also looked at the seller's previous reports to make sure there was no areas of concern on the property. And it was in fact clear. Pannoni also looked at the land title survey, so what we refer to as an ALTA. And what that does is looks at the encumbrances on the property from easements or other areas. And again, nothing was found there to be flagged. Pannoni performed a Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Inventory. There were no endangered species. However, there was an item that we'll need to look through as we go further in design about some birds in the area. We also looked at geotechnical for potential additions and also infiltration for stormwater. That area was investigated in the green areas you see on the property there. And lastly, on this slide, we also looked at the sanitary sewer capabilities of the building. So converting from an office building to a school is an increase in sanitary sewer flow, so we evaluated the ability for the building to be properly served with sanitary, and it can be. Additionally, we looked at all of the utilities for that property and also any kind of distinguishing features such as existing stormwater basins. So looking at this property on this map here, starting on the top on the left, you'll see there's a variety of green areas highlighted. Those are all stormwater basins that were built in 2014, and then the large one on the south side of the property on that slide there was actually built in about 1999 to 2000. So there is a large amount of stormwater management already on the property, and a lot of this, and also meeting code that already currently meets code. We highlighted on the right-hand side there an orange line that is the existing telecommunications line. That is a line that is actually served from the public. It's a Verizon line. And next below that, you'll see there's a sanitary sewer line noted, and then as well as electric lines and water lines as you move down through there, noted in blue and red. So again, the point of our due diligence was to make sure that the property was properly able to be served for the future elementary school's use.
So to summarize the existing structure, the building was built in the mid-1990s. It's a typical steel frame structure, fully sprinklered. There's a number of what we call, from a building code standpoint, shafts within the structure, which consists of shafts for mechanical ductwork, but also the egress stairways, elevators, et cetera. All of those are enclosed with fire-rated construction. There's typical building heights, typical structural dimensions in terms of the overall bays for an office building of its size. And the general construction, again, is both steel as well as concrete, making the building non-combustible from a building code standpoint. The exterior consists of precast concrete hung on the steel structure, along with insulated ribbon windows. These are some photographs of the existing interior of the building. So moving from sort of top right to left, there's views of the existing through lobby, called it a through lobby because it connects the north entrance to the south entrance. There's views of the egress stair, of the existing multi-user restroom, some views of existing tenant space. The bottom left is a view of the existing, that tiered outdoor seating area I mentioned. There's views of the elevator lobby and some currently vacant spaces. These are then some additional views of the interior, which illustrate some of the existing office some of the existing office spaces, as well as stairways and one of the upper floor elevator lobbies. So in regards to the existing office building configuration, these are the floor plans at the first and second floor. And the existing, what we would tend to call core and shell, so the parts of the structure that were originally designed to be immobile to suit the needs of various office users. Those core elements consist of 3 interior egress stairs, one at the east wing, one at the west wing, one at the central lobby, a passenger elevator, a service elevator, and multi-user restrooms at each floor. It's important to note there's a little bit of a jigsaw configuration at the top and the bottom, the north and the south. Really, the reason for this is the structure was originally designed to enhance the number of corner office opportunities, so maximizing value from a corporate office user, maximizing value from a leasing perspective. Our concept design addresses that, and we'll get to that later in the presentation. At the third floor, there's a little bit of an overhang or a cantilever that you saw in one of the earlier photographs. So at the left and the right, or the west and the east, the third floor actually extends over the first and second floors. And there's a bit of a similar condition at the north and south, where that third floor extends and sort of overhangs the existing floors below. Those are also some existing configurations that our concept design that we'll address. At the roof level, there's an existing membrane roof that's typical and consistent with the types of roof the district typically maintains on other facilities. There's also existing 4 rooftop mechanical units, all concealed behind existing roof screens. From a structural standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, AW Lookup, who's worked with the district for many years, evaluated the structural components of the existing building. And the primary findings of that due diligence effort really consisted of the following findings. One, there was really not a structural seismic design when the building was originally designed and built, which is very typical of commercial structures, commercial office buildings of that age. Based on Pannoni's geotechnical evaluation that Mr. Kissinger mentioned earlier, the property was tested and yielded a seismic design category A, which is a great positive. As part of an adaptive reuse, the seismic design would need to be addressed, and that seismic design category A from the geotechnical testing makes that an easier aspect to achieve from a building code standpoint. There would also be a need to address structural implications for lateral loads, as well as certain improvements for certain spaces upstairs, which we will address in a moment. In terms of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, Schiller and Hirsch Associates evaluated the existing systems. And in summary, the existing HVAC system consists of rooftop units with ductwork that essentially extends from that roof level, comes down through the building, branches off, and then is rerouted via variable air volume boxes, VAV boxes, which is a fairly common system in an office building. It also consists of an open plenum return. So the variable air volume boxes provide treated air, heated, cooled air, conditioned air to the space, and then a plenum, which is essentially an open area above the ceiling, returns that air to the rooftop units for additional conditioning. The existing water service, essentially because of its location in the site, in order to demise the building utilities, the domestic water service would essentially be rerouted to the public utility through the site. But the pressure is appropriate. That makes servicing domestic water, it makes servicing sprinklers all very achievable, all very straightforward. The current electrical capacity was judged significant by Schiller Hirsch for the conversion from office to school use. The current lighting is a mix of older fluorescent and some modern LEDs, and as mentioned, the building is fully sprinklered.
Referring back to the slide that we showed about stormwater management, there is a large above-ground basin on the rear side of this property. That above-ground basin is very deep, and it is actually, again, as I mentioned before, constructed in about 98 to 99, and it is actually a registered dam by the DEP. It does not meet the criteria of a dam today, but at the time it did due to the depth of those embankments. It has an impermeable liner underneath it, so that way it would keep water in that pond. And that liner has a manufacturer warranty of about 25 years. So we are quickly approaching the useful lifespan of that liner. So some of the considerations that we looked at were maintenance of that liner, which would require the district to engage engineer yearly to have it inspected. Replacing that liner as it approaches this lifespan would require us to dredge that pond, remove the existing vegetation, and then replace that liner. So there is a consideration of those replacements. Additionally, that underground or that above ground basing would require a lot of safety, or would require a lot of fencing to prevent safety concerns as it relates to having that playground area in proximity to that pond.
At this point, we'd like to turn the presentation over to our solicitor, Ken Roos, who can provide some work takes place on the legal side as well regarding due diligence, and he can provide both a summary of that work and also how it relates to the resolution before the boards for consideration this evening.
Thank you. In general, all real estate transactions involve some sort of site-specific issues. Since this building is currently part of an office park, there are some nuances peculiar to this deal that do need to be addressed. Right now, the building is part of a office park with the adjoining parcel, and the buildings look like they're all part of the same office park. And there are agreements in place now to make sure that those things remain the same. What is happening with this particular case is that because the school district is acquiring the property, those agreements are going to be ended, abrogated, so that whatever left in place is that we are operating an elementary school. We are no longer part of an office park. The property is no longer part of an office park. And there are some few remaining issues that do need to be addressed. There are certain things that can't be separated because of the properties. They share an access, they share utilities, which I will talk about in a second. One issue with it being an office park is that there are tenants currently in the space. There are tenants currently in the building that you've just been seeing slides about. Those tenants need to be relocated, not necessarily on the date that the school district acquires the property, but within 120 days. So the district has required as part of due diligence that that agreements need to be in place by the end of the due diligence period in order to ensure that there will not be holdover tenants there after July 31st, 2024. That due diligence period is this coming Monday, March 18th at 5 p.m. So those documents would need to be in place by then. There are also property line considerations. If you looked carefully at the property line where the properties were, you can see that the property line isn't really drawn just because of the fact that this was a cohesive office park. The property line doesn't really cleanly cut through what was now going to be the school district property and what the remaining office park will look like. That means, for example, there will be a shared access of a roadway. That means that along with that comes with the maintenance of that roadway. Along with that comes with shoveling snow, things like that. Those issues have all been worked out are being worked out in what is called an amended declaration of covenants, conditions, restrictions, and easements. That's the document that you see referenced in the resolution. That's the document that's going to say whose responsibility is to maintain shared access, et cetera. Similarly, there's shared utility lines, and there will be some of that sharing will no longer be the case once the district is, the building is renovated to be a school, and once the school's ready to be operated, but there needs to be agreements in place in the meantime to take care of that. Finally, there needs to be some issues with respect to parking. As you could probably have seen, that property line cuts through parking spaces. There needs to be easements worked out as to who's responsible, who gets to use those parking spaces, who has to maintain them, et cetera. All those considerations are dealt with in this document, this declaration that I referred to. What the declaration does, however, is it ensures a separation of the school district property for all other intents and purposes from the office park, so that separation will occur in the context of this declaration, and also in the context once the district owns the property. As far as, do you want me to walk through the resolution then? The resolution is worded in such a way that it almost puts the rabbit in the hat as far as what the school districts may not go through with this deal. That's not the intent of this resolution. Because there are certain conditions that need to be met by the end of the due diligence period, one of two things has to happen. One of three things can happen. If the school district makes no objection and the due diligence period passes, we are now on track to proceed to closing. There doesn't have to be any affirmative action by the board or anyone on the school district side for the transaction to go forward. It's only if the transaction gets to be terminated or extended before the due diligence deadline. As I stated, those lease agreements need to be in place. That is a condition of the school district can't let the due diligence period lapse until those lease relocations are in place. So that is a condition to move forward with the transaction. Similarly, there needs to be this declaration of covenants and conditions and restrictions and easements that I referenced. That needs to be completely finalized and fully executed. There is every reason to believe that that can be accomplished by the due diligence period, but in the event it can't be, the superintendent needs to have the authority to extend the due diligence period, whatever period of time, to allow those documents to be finalized. If it's determined they can't be, for whatever reason, can't be finalized, the superintendent needs the authority to terminate the agreement before the due diligence period expires. Similarly, if something happens, there's some condition that occurs between now and Monday that is unforeseen, there also needs to be the ability to do that, for the superintendent to do that, because there cannot be another school board public meeting between now and the due diligence period. The superintendent has to be authorized to terminate the agreement under those conditions. But that, according to this, that authority is limited to being approved through an executive session of the school board. The superintendent will not get the discretion under this resolution to do that unilaterally. So that's what the agreement does. It basically says, okay, we realize there are these conditions that need to be met by March 18th, 5 p.m. The remaining conditions either have to be met, or we either need to extend the due diligence deadline, or we need to terminate the agreement. That's what this resolution says.
Thank you. I think we will return to the design team to talk about, I think, some of the more interesting elements of the evening, and that is the concept design and what the transformation of the current office site might look like as we move forward in its pathway to be an elementary school if all those conditions are satisfied. So we'll go back to Mr. Heckendorn.
So moving on to concept design, what we'll be sharing this evening is an illustration of how the office building could be adaptively reused to serve as a sixth elementary school for the district. And I'll stress that this will need to go through many additional rounds of programming, of design, or review and approvals. This really represents a starting point. I'd also note that should the project and process continue to move forward, and should the board continue the process, this is really a generational project. The district hasn't built a new school since 1965. And equally important in my mind as an architect, this is an extremely timely project. There's a situation in our society associated with office buildings and sort of the post-pandemic remote work implications. Lots of people in real estate circles are talking about adaptively reusing suburban office buildings, converting them to educational. Very few people are actually taking action in that direction. So with that prelude, existing and proposed site plan. So the existing site plan is on your left, and the proposed site plan is on your right. What you'll observe, the asphalt paving, probably obviously, that's shown in sort of a gray tone. So massive amounts of impervious surface are, in this iteration of the concept design, proposed to be removed on the south or the bottom of the page. That existing paving, as well as the existing stormwater management basin, which would essentially be reconstructed as new stormwater management, but filled over so that it wouldn't present some of the challenges that having an open basin would on an elementary school site. That whole southern area of the site would provide for playing fields, would provide for kindergarten playground, grades 1 to 4 playground, an asphalt play area, soccer field, all those playground improvements consistent with the improvements that the district is making throughout the other elementary schools. And at the north, we'd really attempt to leverage the existing, approach it in as cost-effective a manner as possible, and really do some surgical tweaks to the existing paving. In particular, we'd be able to address vehicular and bus circulation, which I'll go into more detail right now. So this is essentially a diagram of that same site plan, and this illustrates some of what the concept design includes. So the intention would be to reuse as much as possible. So maintaining a lot of the existing parking on the north or the top side of the site plan, potentially reutilizing that tiered patio as essentially an outdoor classroom, a space for outdoor educational and instructional activities. Most of the stormwater management features that you saw diagrammed in Mr. Kissinger's diagram as that sort of neon green, those would remain. And we'd also reutilize that shared entrance off of Swedesford Road. From a passenger vehicle and bus intermingling and traffic configuration, the idea would be to separate bus and passenger vehicles as soon as possible. So all vehicles would come off of Swedesford Road, but passenger vehicles would make an immediate right-hand turn. Buses would continue to the bus loop, which is highlighted in orange or mustard here. The existing parking, which is outlined in sort of a green-blue, that's parking which is in a fair amount of excess in terms of quantity of parking spaces when compared to the other 5 elementary schools. And then in sort of the tan tone, or the salmon tone, pink, that really illustrates the opportunity for queuing space. So there's potential for more parking here, much more passenger vehicle drop-off and pickup queuing, and a very nice separation of bus and passenger vehicles. I'd also note that all the play features being at the bottom or the south of the site, the intention is to gate that passenger vehicle loop during school hours so that there would be no vehicular traffic during school hours whenever children are using the play areas.
So as Mr. Heckendorn had previously mentioned, the project will require us to add a new fire water line and domestic water line to Sweetsford Road. That is shown on the map there in a blue line. That is simply so that way we could disconnect from the previous office complex and have our own meter with our own service. Additionally, we will be adding some sanitary sewer lines to the addition shown. However, largely we're using the existing lines that are there today. The three green boxes shown on that plan are proposed stormwater facilities that are all in addition to the existing facilities that are out there today. So all of those facilities that exist today on the north lot there in the parking lot, and they are all code compliant, built in 2014, they will all remain. The only stormwater feature that we'd be removing in this concept design is the above ground pond in the rear. For the reasons that Mr. Eckendorn already outlined. So the goal on that plan would be to match volumes of that existing pond and provide that system in an underground fashion. The two additional asphalt areas that are on the bus loop and as well as a parking area, we have provided additional stormwater management for those two facilities as well.
So moving on to the building itself. The concept design essentially would yield a school with comparable spaces to any of the existing elementary schools. In general, we're at the higher end of average in sizes of classrooms, in sizes of specials rooms like art, science, music, and in general, we have slightly larger common rooms such as the cafeteria, gymnasium, library, partially because we do have a few more classrooms proposed than what exists in the typical elementary school. By a few, I mean 30 rather than 28 or 27. So having some additional breathing room and space in some of those common rooms is important from a scheduling and use standpoint. The lower graphic illustrates what portions of the project, what portions of the building are proposed to be reused and new. So what's illustrated in sort of the green tone is the existing elementary school, and what's in black and white grayscale is really two new additions adjacent to one another. So the first is on the north entry where the entrance to that through lobby is. You'll recall we discussed the sort of jigsaw nature of that with lots of corner offices. That's really challenging from creating an interior space plan with a corridor in the middle and classrooms on both sides. So the proposal on that north elevation is to infill that area, which would allow us to create a much more regular floor plan and more usable spaces at the interior. And then the other addition immediately adjacent to the right of it is essentially a new gymnatorium, which would provide gymnasium and gathering space for assembly and such, as well as a new main entrance lobby. This is a fairly straightforward illustration of the existing square footage and the potential for shell space. So as part of the evaluation, we were really looking with the school district on the program, the parts and pieces, rooms required to satisfy the instructional program. The gymnasium just didn't make any sense from a square footage standpoint or a demolition reconstruction standpoint to try to fit within the existing multi-story office building. And so in this scenario, we end up with a surplus of about 9,000 square feet that could be utilized for the district in the future for a future use to be determined, which essentially translates to an overall building of just over 99,000 square feet based on this concept design. The next series of drawings are some block plans. The district has a policy of not sharing detailed floor plans from a security standpoint, so I'll talk you through these generally. Essentially, this is a first floor block plan. To orient you, the new gymnatorium is on the upper left. The existing building extends from left to right. The new lobby is sort of the connector there. And the first floor would consist of kindergarten and first grade classrooms, a main office area, cafeteria, as well as, of course, the gymnatorium. We're also proposing to modify and relocate the stairways. So the stairways, the 3 internal stairs, were really built, designed for office users. They weren't designed for large numbers of elementary school students changing classes at the same time. There's sort of a rush hour effect, if you will. So those stairways would move to the perimeter. The stairway at the center would remain at the center but get larger, and that would also help us address some of those items I mentioned earlier relative to the structural engineering and complying with current codes. So the second floor would then include classrooms for second grade, as well as the library and all of the special spaces. So science classrooms, music, art, as well as the large group room. And then the third floor would consist of the hatch indicates the future shell space, as well as primarily classrooms for third and fourth grade. I think what's most important about the layouts to date is the students' perception of the building and how they perceive and move through the space. And from a kindergarten through second grade standpoint, this is essentially a 2-story building. So this is, imagine a sort of slice of bread of the building. This is sort of a basic building section. So the gymnatorium, lobby, cafeteria, all the kindergarten and first grade classrooms clustered at the first floor, and then second grade, library, large group room, et cetera, all at the second floor. So unless you're a third or fourth grade student, there's really never a need to be up at that third floor. So we're trying to take into account the students' experiential journey through the new structure. We've also developed some very preliminary views of what the school could look like. So this is an aerial perspective looking from the north to the south, and you'll observe the new bus loop. You'll observe the new infill construction at the north face, the new gymnatorium construction. In the rear, you'll see the general blocks layouts for the playgrounds and the asphalt area. The general thinking was to, I'll go to this view. The general thinking was to essentially utilize brick and punched windows, which are a traditional Pennsylvania school architectural motif. Essentially utilize those punched windows and a brick tone that would complement the existing precast concrete for the new construction, and do some very selective and limited facade envelope improvements. We're showing some here at the corner of a thin brick that would complement it to try to tie the hall sort of composition together. But this gives you a view of that main entry. It gives you a view of a potential new bus canopy at the bus loop. And then here's a sort of zoomed in view that gives you another view of the new lobby, of the potential for a new canopy. And the goal here is really, we're not trying to build a Taj Mahal, we're not trying to add every bell and whistle, but we're also not building a Butler building or a shed, right? We're trying to walk a defined line of providing an appropriate educational environment that can be used for the next 50 years. So from an HVAC standpoint, and we'll kind of talk through several of the building systems, we looked at many options working with Schiller and Hirsch on HVAC. And we considered supplementing the existing system, partially replacing it, looking at a high-performance new system. The main issues that we're trying to address are filtration as well as acoustics. So because of the existing system configuration, leaving it in place, modifying it would result in issues for filtration and acoustics, which would really not match the district's other educational facilities. So what we arrived at, and this will be subject to further refinement during schematic design, is a variable refrigerant flow type system. It's a very common system in commercial structures today. It works quite well in incorporating into an existing facility that has limited floor-to-floor heights and such, and it also would satisfy filtration requirements as well as acoustics. So in terms of approvals, we'll have a short discussion of that. So Mr. Kissinger and I had a preliminary meeting with Tredyffrin Township and discussed the overall approach to the project. And there's really three sequences of approvals that we anticipate the project will require. So one is zoning relief. So as Mr. Kissinger illustrated earlier, we're taking an existing site that has a lot of asphalt paving, that has a fair amount of stormwater management. We're going to maintain all that stormwater management. We're going to decrease the amount of parking and paving, create more pervious surface, and we're still going to add more stormwater management. Because of the history of the site, the details of when it was developed, subsequent zoning changes after it was developed, we're still going to have some relief, and we'll go through the Township Zoning Hearing Board to request that relief. Subsequent to that, or towards the end of that, we anticipate going to the Township Board of Supervisors for a conditional use hearing. So a conditional use is sort of a lower standard of relief required because it's a conditional use, it's not a variance. And that process would be required in order to ascertain what conditions are associated with placing a school here. And then lastly, we'd go through the Township Planning Commission approvals process from a land development perspective to evaluate the reconfiguration of certain parking areas and asphalt and incorporation of playgrounds and such. There are some other regulatory entities we'll need to interact with for sediment, erosion and sediment control and that sort of thing, but we don't really anticipate any work associated with PennDOT, and really these are the primary regulatory approvals we need to navigate. So from a schedule and cost standpoint, I'll just share this slide again. We're in due diligence. There are many, many decisions to solidify anything of what you're seeing tonight, and there's a long way to go. But in terms of a very preliminary schedule, this essentially acknowledges a due diligence period which extends to March 18th. As you heard earlier from the district solicitor, Mr. Roos, that is subject to validation. But this schedule contemplates that as a due diligence date and really anticipates moving forward with approvals, with design, schematic design, documentation, bidding, et cetera, with the goal of completing approvals and bid documents towards fall of next year, so towards November of 25. Again, this is preliminary, it's a starting point. And that would allow for construction then to proceed from fall of 25 into summer of 27. Note that this is overall construction. So the manner in which public projects in Pennsylvania are bid, contractors submit bids, the lowest responsive bidder is award. Typically projects don't start the next day. There's a pre-construction process, there's a process to essentially line up their subcontractors, et cetera. So consider that purple bar the overall duration. But what this schedule allows for is a project completion and move in advance of the 2027-28 school year. So from a budgetary standpoint, so this is a project budget based on really 4 building blocks. One building block was Becker-Frondorf. So if you recall the second slide of the presentation, Becker-Frondorf is a third-party cost consultant. We've worked with them on the Conestoga addition, on the Fields project, on the infrastructure projects that the district routinely proceeds with every summer. So essentially we provided Becker-Frondorf with our concept design, we provided them with the engineering information, they utilized that information to develop a cost estimate associated with construction, which includes some contingencies. We also worked to solicit a quote for furniture from a CoStars vendor that the district has worked with in the past. We also received costs associated with the fiber extension of the district's fiber network to this site from Terranet. And we also received proposals from the various engineering consultants to solidify the professional services approach. So back in January, we had evaluated an initial schedule. Recall that that's before we had officially visited the site and such. From a cost perspective, most of those costs were relatively in line with the initial expectation There's some line items that went down, like furniture. That's because other items went up, like construction, which is essentially a reallocation of certain componentry of the project from one line item to another. The main modifications that we became aware of was the lack of ability to reutilize the existing HVAC system in a way that would serve the acoustics and serve the filtration needs of the district. And the other aspect that we were including that's an edit between January and now was that pond infill, which for the various reasons that we've discussed makes a lot of sense in terms of incorporating it into the base project. There's also those adjustments essentially put us at an adjusted project budget of just over $69 million, which includes the purchase price from the seller. In terms of other options to be investigated during future design phases, we're listing 3 items. There's been a discussion of more high-performance HVAC systems. From an HVAC system evaluation, we'd be going through a life cycle analysis to look at energy costs, look at maintenance costs, provide a sort of all-in evaluation, because the nature of that should be decided based on anticipated life cycle costs. There's a gymnasium expansion idea, which I'll share in a moment. There's also potential of adding specific strategies, things like solar panels at the new construction roofs. Some of these options, like the solar panels, could be included as a bid alternate, which would mean making a decision in fall of '25.
Even those of you that have come to a lot of facilities committee meetings during the development of where we are right now in the high school addition and in the Fields project know that there are hundreds of decision points along the road where the district will present to the board different options as the project develops. We're naming 3 that would be decided relatively early in the process, because some of these things can be done through an ad alternate when it's bidded. Let's bid it both ways. But something like an HVAC system or the size of the footprint of the building would need to be decided relatively early. So there'll be discussion of these items at the bottom very shortly, assuming the purchase moves through due diligence and closing.
And so as a for instance of that, the gymnasium, the gymnatorium, as included in the concept design, is illustrated in blue. The red illustrates a potential extension of that, and what that extension would do is bring the gymnasium space in line with one of the middle school gyms. So this is simply an illustration of one potential option. To Dr. Gusik's point, there'll be many options evaluated as part of the project should the purchase continue. So one of the items I didn't touch on directly was the environmental sustainability of the project. This is an incredibly sustainable project. We're taking existing asphalt paving, removing it, maintaining stormwater management, adding more stormwater management. We're taking the shell of an underused built environment asset and repurposing it for a use that will provide for instructional purposes for many years to come. This is a great opportunity.
With that, we'll turn it back to you, President Kantorsek.
Thanks, Dr. Gusik, and thanks, Matt and Mike, for all the work that you've done, and I'm not going to ignore Art and Dr. Simondero over here as well. Even though they didn't speak, they did a lot of work as well. I mean, it was a very compressed time frame to gather a lot of information about this building and its usability for an elementary school, and you guys really did a nice job in doing that, and it's obvious here in the presentation and the details of that. Still have a couple of questions, I imagine, that the board has and folks have. I have one to start. It's really not so much a question, but more of a ask for some additional details. We talked about the upgrades to the HVAC system. And as you could see from the cost item in terms of additional things that we've talked about, that's one of the more significant additional costs. Could you provide perhaps a little more detail about the unusability of the current system from an acoustics and filtration standpoint, and really why you think it is important and critical to upgrade or replace that system with something else?
Certainly. So the existing system consists of rooftop units that are mounted on the roof, and they feed ductwork which flows from that rooftop mounted unit down to the variable air volume, the VAV boxes that distribute the space. That's the supply air. The return air, and that takes the air down, the conditioned air within the rooms and spaces. Then the return air essentially cycles up through an open plenum. So rather than being a ducted return, it's just an open plenum. So above the ceiling right now, there's a return air vent, and that goes into the space, and it's all of the space above the ceiling, which obviously in a more modern environment, you'd extend the walls up above the ceiling, extend them to the structural deck, seal them with an acoustic sealant so that you'd create an acoustic separation. Because of the existing system, there's the lack of acoustics, which would be particularly problematic for an elementary school use. On the filtration side, the existing units just can't handle the MERV 13 filtration that the district uses in other facilities. We could swap out the rooftop units and keep and revise some componentry to the existing system. We would be able to address the MERV 13 filtration that way, but we wouldn't really address the acoustics. We could do things like build the partitions, the walls between classrooms up to deck, but leave them open to the corridor above ceiling. That's not really an acceptable solution. There's many different HVAC options, so we're suggesting consideration of variable refrigerant flow. What that system would consist of is generally it's more of a sort of coolant-based system. So imagine refrigerant lines going throughout the building rather than big ductwork going throughout the building. There's still fresh air delivered, still fresh air, outside air, but via much smaller units. And that variable refrigerant flow system, that's something that we've used on other large educational projects. Then there's other options beyond that, and doing a deeper dive on the HVAC system would be part of the schematic design exercise.
If I could add one thing that I believe I heard in some of our meetings is that if we open the school in 2027, the lifespan of the existing rooftop units is about 5 years.
Correct.
Possibly a little longer, but essentially you should expect to need to replace them potentially within 5 years. And it certainly seems silly because the expense of doing that separately, of opening the building and then just 5 years later replacing the RTUs with all the associated work would certainly be more expensive than incorporating that work into the current project.
Thank you both. So to sort of put a little finer point, at least on the acoustics part, right? What you're talking about is under the current configuration, if you were to put a bunch of first graders in one room next to another room of first graders, it would be really loud between the two, is what you're saying, because of the lack of wall, essentially, that goes between the two classrooms from a certain point up to the ceiling. So in other words, it would be really hard to run a classroom of a bunch of very well-behaved first graders. Okay, so that's helpful. And on the filtration side, in terms of the MERV 13, we've talked about this, the filtration issue extensively over the past number of years in terms of the amount of and the quality of filtration that's necessary for elementary school spaces, and that's been a subject in the news and over the past number of years in particular, not to bring up bad things, but related to the pandemic and how indoor air filtration could be improved in our educational spaces. And so what you're saying is that in order to be able to accommodate the type of air filtration that we expect in our schools, we would have to upgrade this system in that way. And so that's why it's being recommended as really not just an option for using this, but really almost a requirement in order to be able to reuse this space as an elementary school.
That is correct. It really comes down to it's a perfectly good system for an office building, but it's not an appropriate system for an elementary school.
Okay, thank you. And then one more thing, the other thing that we talked a little bit about was the middle school gymnasium, and as opposed to an elementary school gymnasium, as that being an option. Can somebody talk a little bit, it's probably you, Dr. Gusick, about why we would even consider middle school size gymnatorium as opposed to an elementary school size gymnatorium?
And I may look to Mr. McDonald, who manages the use of our facilities by outside groups, but also school groups. When you cross the threshold from an elementary-sized gymnasium to a middle school-sized gymnasium, it opens up the possibility for a lot more use from outside groups. We see that historically. The demand for space in our district schools is far greater with our middle school gyms and our high school gyms. So you'd have an opportunity to provide something for the community at large at an expense that is estimated currently. That question would be, do we want to consider that as we go along to add that option, or just put in a gymnasium that's the size of our other elementary schools, which would meet the needs of the elementary school but have less utility for programs there, large meetings such as this, meetings for or functions that the community might want that they typically would put in a middle school side space there's a lot of demand for those spaces right now. I don't know if there's anything to add to that.
Thank you, Dr. Gusick. So I'll turn to the rest of the board and see if we have some questions or comments. Yes, Ms. Teedy.
Thank you. First, I want to add my thanks to you, Matt, and also Mike, well, the whole team. When you look at those first slides, it looks like an office building, and you look at what you've envisioned, which I think is extremely creative, it looks like more of an elementary school, and especially from the front with that change in the staggered, yes, that's the one. I mean, it's very creative, and I really appreciate all that. I could never dream of something like that. Also, just to sort of add on to Mr. Kontorsik's concern about the air conditioning, I find it very compelling what you're saying about the sound, because I was a teacher in the 70s when open classrooms was a thing. It was an architectural thing. And I have to say, after a few years of people not finding it conducive for young children, many schools, including the one I taught of in New York State at the time, put up walls between these places because the noise was just not working. And so I realize the MERV thing is also extremely important, but I just wanted to add my voice to that. The other thing, I have a question for Mr. Kissinger about the pond. So is the price, it's I didn't write it down fast enough, but I think it was $1.5 million. So that would be putting it all underground, the stormwater management. I also want to say I find that very appealing because I just think the safety issues of a pond on an elementary campus aren't the best at all, and no matter how high the fence is. But the 1.5 million is an expense to do that with this at this time. To do that replacement, which you're thinking would happen in about 5 years, that's not is this a net? Meaning you didn't account for what it would cost the district if they kept it and then had to redo it, which was draining it, dredging it, and putting in a new liner?
Correct. So the 1.5 does not take into account the amount of work that would need to be done to replace it. So if you were to replace it, then the net difference would be less than that 1.5.
And then the other thing I wondered about is with this gym idea, it does, I understand that it would be easier to rent, but in terms of the scale of it, just for me personally, and I'm one of 9 people, I think an elementary school should have an elementary-sized gym. But could it be an alternate in terms of the bidding? Or would you have to do it, you have to make a decision right off because of all the land that it would take and so forth?
Yeah, we could start the land approvals process showing a larger, but at some point we'll need to define it, at some point relatively earlier in the process. We certainly can take during schematic design and do a deeper dive. These are rough order of magnitude budgets. So in the past, not quite 60 days, we've been focused on all of the engineering evaluations, but also sort of concurrently the design and pricing, because that goes into the overall discussion point. So we could certainly, as I'm saying, we could do a deeper dive on HVAC. We could do a deeper dive on actually assessing the costs of the gym. So what's presented in that budget worksheet is essentially looking at the price of the proposed addition and prorating that at a slightly lowered square footage cost, because there's an order of magnitude savings when you're building something a little larger. So we could look at that more thoroughly in order for the board to make a more informed decision.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Hong?
I'd also like to address the gym size. This school that we've spec'd out so far it's going to be one of our largest, or will be the largest elementary school that we have, with 30 classrooms versus 27 or 28. I see having the larger gym as being able to accommodate those additional students as well. We also have that unused portion of the 3rd floor if enrollment goes up and we need to expand into that space with additional classrooms. This would also be able to support that, provide a space during rain days where they can't go out and play. And aside from the rental and income opportunities that this may provide, I see that also as providing better sized space for the size of the school.
I'm usually on one end, so I have to have my head on a swivel, but we'll start over here. Dr. Hatinsky.
All right, thank you. I'll add my kudos to everyone else's, and I will add that I have heard multiple people from the public have said that all the presentations as we've gone along, that they've been really impressed with the detail, and that the sort of logical questions one would ask have been answered. So I think it's been a great process all the way along, since we've been talking about this for over a year now. And I wanted to go back to the approvals process, because you've explained this to us, but I think the one thing that seems a little odd is that we go to the zoning relief and then the conditional use. So it's currently not zoned to be used as a public elementary school. So could you just go over that and why we're comfortable with moving forward, that this is the right way to do it and that we'll get to all these approvals?
Of course. So again, as Mr. Heckendorf mentioned, the property is zoned as an office and actually has a split zone. The township has an overlay for institutional uses. So we'd be applying this overlay to the property. And that would allow for elementary schools as a conditional use, which is a permitted use. So schools are permitted subject to conditions, and that's a very key piece. Then there are these zoning relief variances that we would require, and so typically those have a more let's say barrier to achieve. So that's why you would do those first. In this situation, one of them is impervious, which is ironic again because we're reducing the impervious on the property by so much, but that overlay has a lower threshold. So by using that overlay, but in short, you would get the variances first is the typical process. The conditional use process is very similar to the land development process. It's just an extra hearing in there. But the very key critical piece is that the school is permitted by conditional use. So it is a permitted use. So that's why you would frame it that way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions from the board for now? Understanding we do have another opportunity for questions or comments. Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to the public comment portion of the presentation, but like the, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Where we have a little bit of a feedback. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Hold on. It's just Dr. Allen. I think she's listening on the live stream as well. Is the issue? So, Dr. Allen, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Dr. Allen couldn't be here in person tonight, so Dr. Allen is on the phone here, as noted by the sign. Dr. Allen, did you have a comment or question?
I just wanted to note that, you know what, I'll save it after the public comment.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so now we are going to move to the public comment portion, but we're going to run it like we did the last time we were here, and it's a little bit different from our usual process. In order to get a sense as to how many residents wish to speak tonight, so I can determine the appropriate amount of time for each speaker, I'm going to call a brief 5-minute recess. Anyone who is interested in speaking, please go into the sign-in table. Dr. Grappi and Ms. Roy are over there signaling, and provide your name and township of residence. After the recess, I will call each speaker forward for comments. So if you believe you might want to speak, please sign up now. When your name is called, you may change your mind and decline the opportunity to speak. As a reminder, each public comment period is reserved for residents and taxpayers. Additionally, the board will accept comments from sitting public officials or for non-campaigning purposes, and by agreement with the TEA and TENIG, the board will accept comments from the union presidents. With that, our 5-minute recess will begin, so our speakers may sign up at the table. Okay, we will call this meeting back to order and start the public comment portion of the meeting. I have my list here that's got 7 names on it. With that in mind, I think we're going to give everybody 5 minutes for their public comment period as opposed to the usual 3, so that we have plenty of time for folks to make their comments. With that, we'll start with the first person on the list, and that's Ray Clark. Come on down. You're the next contestant. Right, and behind Mr. Clark are Hans Van Mol and Mike Heberg.
All right. Thank you to everybody for the presentation. Obviously, it's a very exciting prospect here, especially for those of us in the West who may, with good fortune, be in the catchment area here. I want to talk about 2 things. One is impervious surface turf fields, and the second is money. So first, the implication from one of the slides was that the playing fields are going to be, quote, turf. Does that mean synthetic turf?
The playing fields are anticipated to be grass,
Now
not
that-
artificial turf.
That is really excellent news. The Township Environmental Advisory Council will be doing backflips. Excellent.
To maintain consistency with the other 5 elementary schools.
Although we did just agree to put synthetic turf fields in Valley Forge Elementary, did we not? Anyway,
So
the
let
good news here.
me just go to one of the,
Sorry, he should make his
We usually have, in order to be able to keep time, right, let's go through your entire comments, and then we can have the response or any sort of clarification.
Okay. Well, anyway, so good news if it's grass. I would say that Open Land Conservancy, we just took out a dam and a pond of about the same size as this for 1/10 of the cost that I saw. So maybe there are some opportunities there with, I could recommend a contractor that did an excellent job. And then most important of all, we slid right over the base cost of what we're proposing here compared to First Avenue and Jefferson Lane. And I think it's really worthwhile looking at, okay, kind of the Jefferson Lane base cost X, the First Avenue base cost Y, this base cost, let's assume before the elaborate HVAC, but with the HVAC that you have to do. And what is that? How much of a premium are we paying for this adaptive reuse, which, obviously has all the great, benefits from that. But I think it's really important that we know the dollars associated with it. So, my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. While we're on it, so do you want to clarify something about the elementary school playgrounds and the use of turf?
yes, so let me clarify. The brown boxes on the left and right immediately below the loop road are rubberized surface playground areas. The light gray box in between them is an asphalt play area. The tiny strip below that light gray box is a small area of turf. Those 4 components, the rubberized surface of the playgrounds, the asphalt play area, and the small strip of turf, are part of the district-wide playground study. It's consistent with what exists or what will be added at all of the elementary schools. Everything below those brown playground boxes, the soccer field, baseball, all of that is proposed to be grass field.
Yes, Dr. Gusick?
And could you put the finance page up? I know there'll be a lot of questions about this, and it is going to change as time goes through, and certainly anybody can have a chance to pore over it once we get that on the website as soon as we can. So what you see several things on this column, and you do see the First Avenue price and the Jefferson Lane price, and the Swedesford Road estimate based on January 17th. What makes this not apples to apples is that we were able to go through this due diligence process and actually have experts on site to do the environmental studies, to do all of those studies that were necessary for us to refine that price before we gave that to Becker Frondorf and had a revised price. So ultimately, we can look at that revised price that's based before we looked at the pond and the HVAC. But if we compare that just to the other two, there could be movement with those within the low to high range if we took those same steps with those other properties and put experts on and did this level of work and developed site plans. It also produced less school, right? So we could only get, because of the size of the Berwyn site, for example, 26 classrooms, no shelf space, not as large of other areas. So it isn't truly apples to apples to apples, but I get it. Certainly we want to look at the price of all of those. One of them, we were able to take a 60-day period and dig a little deeper to get a little better number, and the other two we weren't, and probably never would unless, for example, this would fall through.
Thank you, Dr. Gusick. We'll go with our next commenter, Hans Van Mol. And I should ask folks, because it's not written on here, if you could just restate your township of residence when you come up, that would be great.
Sure. Hans Van Mol, Tredyffrin Township. I just want to thank everybody for the very thorough presentation. And as a side, thank you to the team that has been streaming this online. I was following along online and felt so compelled to come join in that I made my way over here. So I was not able, or I did not lose a single thing. So thank you to your tech team for doing so well on that. Really love the ideas that are being proposed here. I think it's obvious that we finally are addressing the long-term projects of growth within the district, and good to see that we're going to finally kind of take the hard steps that are going to be necessary, which is in building the school. Just for clarity, and this is to whomever has the insight on this, could you just dive a little bit more into the project timeline, particularly the bidding and approval process, and what assurances is the district going to have to make sure that whomever ultimately is brought on to accomplish the contracting and construction of this, that it's done in a responsible manner. I remember seeing the issues that occurred over in the Westchester School District where the district ended up getting harmed pretty badly by a negligent contractor who was able to get a judgment out of them. And I just want to make sure that a similar thing does not occur in the TE School District and make sure that we are protecting our taxpayers' assets before we kind of get caught up in a situation where now we're having to litigate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does somebody over on that side of the table wish to respond?
What is asked about the timeline?
Really, it sounded like it was sort of the bidding timeline for purposes of the project and the vetting that process goes through to ensure that we would have a quality contractor who can actually finish the job on a timely basis in a quality manner.
Right, so there's a certain amount we can control and a certain amount that we can't control, and that is because of the way the laws are structured regarding public bids. We do have to have separate bids for 4 different prime levels of contracts, and if there is a responsible bidder for each of those, we would need to award it to the lowest bid. So to some extent, we are not in total control of who will get that lowest bid. If that person who gets the lowest bid has done a great job on 70% of their projects, and we talk to 30% of the people, and it's not great, it would be really hard to disqualify that bidder. We probably would not prevail in a contest, but that doesn't necessarily mean that person would bring that, the level of expertise we would expect. So we put safeguards on our end in place. We have our own project management. We have in-house district workers who check all steps. These folks at this table, and not just them, have a team of individuals that check the project along the way. And oftentimes we're dissatisfied and we say that's not acceptable, we can't accept that work, and we argue about it. I don't know the level of oversight provided by other districts. Whoever is selected, it's an incredibly important project. It's an incredible investment of public resources, and we would need to keep close eye on that to make sure that however the project is spec'd out, that it was built to that specification. Sometimes you can get a contractor that is challenging to work with, and we would have to manage that, at the time. And hopefully we've also had lots of experience with wonderful contractors who've given us the best price and delivered a great product. Mr. McDonald, do you have anything to add with that?
Just some of the additional things that we do prior to accepting the lowest responsible bidder, and I say responsible in quotes, but we do build into the bid spec that they have to be a contractor that's done the type of work that we're bidding. We typically ask for 5 years of experience. We ask for examples. We do a Dun & Bradstreet look at the contractor, and then we also make phone calls. We check references of what they provide in the documentation. So there is a lot of upfront work before we hit the ground with the lowest responsible bidder recommended to the board.
So all those things are protective measures, but they don't totally eliminate the risk that you have with any project when you're working with a contractor.
Thank you. All right, we'll go with our next commenter, Mr. Mike Heberg.
Heberg, Tredyffrin. First of all, excellent presentation. I guess I would echo Mr. Clark's comment about the financial part of it in the comparison to the other sites. We are here in finance on January the 8th. The estimated cost of this project was $70 million. About a week and a half later, when we had the first presentation here, we were down to $64.5 million, and now we're back to $69 million, plus a potential $6 million plus, of contingency. So we could end up at $75 million. So we're kind of we were heading in the right direction, and now we're sort of heading in the wrong direction in terms of cost. I'll address a couple of my other questions, the sort of technical things that maybe some of the engineer and the architect could help me with. First of all, do we anticipate any sinkhole issues, given that part of the township has a lot of karst geology? Is that something that you're concerned about, and is there any history on this particular site related to that? My second question is, what's the current number of EDUs, sewer units that are on the site, and how many additional will be required, and what will be the cost of that? Because there will be, I assume, tapping fees if we need more sewage capacity. And I guess my additional questions are really more related to the approvals process that was described. I know that in the past, especially most recently with the field project, there was a significant escalation in costs between the original estimates that were somewhere in the $17, $18 million range to the current estimate, which is $32 million plus. And there were obviously inflationary cost increases of the construction, but there were also unanticipated requirements that were in the millions of dollars that I think added significantly to the costs. So there were some comments made, and I just was hoping you guys could expand on that. Specifically, the stormwater was discussed, and I assume that that's included in the estimate that's been provided. Have you accounted for the likely requirement that the district would be required to comply with the township's tree removal and replacement ordinance? And what is the issue related to, what have you noted in terms of fencing? There are restrictions as to the height and type of fencing at various locations, and I assume there will be fencing required. What are the assumptions related to signage, lighting? And I guess I wonder, along with that is, what are we assuming we're going to get relief from? Are we assuming that we're going to comply with the codes, or what kind of variances are being anticipated related to that? Does the parking on the site meet the current requirements, and does the proposed parking meet the requirements that will be required by the township. And then finally, Mr. Heckendorf made the comment that he didn't think that PennDOT would have to be consulted. And it seems to me that given the location of the school, there would be issues related to the traffic signals, to crosswalks, to either required or proposed sidewalks in that location, to an alternate service entrance or potential emergency route off of Howville Road. So I'm somewhat puzzled to think that PennDOT is not going to want to weigh in on a number of issues related to the particular location that we're looking at. Appreciate the presentation, and I look forward to getting my questions answered. Thank you.
If I could summarize.
Oh, yeah, yes, go ahead. Go ahead. I listened to him too, but go ahead.
Okay, I was just making sure we try to address the numbers of sewage units and how that will change, and if there's costs known. Fencing, these are all related to the types of relief we might need. Fencing, parking, signage, lighting, traffic, and the degree to which PennDOT needs to be involved. Those are the ones that I had.
Karst, yeah.
Did I
The
miss
karst
anything?
geology and the sinkholes.
Okay.
And tree removal.
Do we have it?
And the tree, and also tree removal.
Yeah. And what have you assumed in terms of what has been included in terms of the cost of those items?
So-
Are you assuming we're not going to have to comply with some of these requirements and therefore we're not including any costing? Or we're going to have to comply, and if we don't have, and depending on how it goes, will we save money? So those,
Well, part of, I mean, you made a comment about how the number was one price, and then it was another price, and then it was another price. And there's reasons for that, and I know you and I have talked about some of them. The original price, we did try to work things down. We had a completely exterior cafeteria and kitchen, for example. We were actually moving parking, and we found we were able to utilize a lot of the more existing parking, and that brought the price down. Right on the page, you see that cost estimate was actually pretty accurate. Actually, it's slightly high, but there were two factors that weren't known that we needed to get into due diligence to discover that we've priced out. We have continued and do continue to look at the pricing of that. What you might notice from this last presentation, if anybody's keeping track of all this stuff, again, we're not trying to take credit for every single thing, but we thought at least last time we could have the cafeteria in the envelope, but we would still probably need the kitchen outside of the envelope due to ventilation. These folks found a way, because we're moving the stairwells, we can have shafts that go to the roof, and we can run the ventilation through that and also bring the cafeteria kitchen into the current envelope as well. So that was a downward pressure on some of these prices. It will continue to move, and as we're transparent, you will see shifts. I would predict you'll see many shifts when we are moving through this, but we're just trying to be open and transparent about that as possible. I don't know if any of you have any comments on the list that we made that we could provide.
Sure. So, Mr. Heberg, I'll try to go through them. I made some notes on my phone here. So yes, it's about 18 additional EDUs, which is about a cost of $35,000 of tapping fees and conveyance fees. Yes, you're correct. The township has a history of karst geology. The geotechnical work that we've done to date, it does not show any signs of any kind of karst geology in the region we're building the expansion. The basins were built in 2014 on the front of the property, largely still exist today in the same configuration. The infiltration tests done for the cellar were also very conclusive and supportive of infiltrating in geology. So we don't see any need for, obviously there's always a risk of sinkholes, but there is no, known history on it. You see some stormwater maintenance just like everybody else, but that's about it. In terms of tree removal, much like the idea of saving the parking lot, the idea is, I'd say the trees that are being removed are in the rear of the property in the existing parking lot, and those are tree island trees that were probably built in the 90s or 2000, 99, 2000. They're largely stunted because of their growth, so they are actually small. But tree removal will not be an issue. We have to provide buffering, and we have to provide other aspects. And so through all of that, we will meet the tree removal code. There shouldn't be an issue there. In fact, I don't think the tree removal code currently written has any negative impact on this property. Fencing, you're correct. Much in line with the way the district has fenced all of their properties, there will be a proposed 6-foot-high chain link fence around the perimeter. That will require variances, much in line with everybody, with all the other properties. Signage and lighting, we have not really delved into that much of it. We do know that we're going to use much of the existing parking lot, therefore the pole locations are already set for us. Those large basins that are underneath the front parking lot kind of prevent where we can really move lights as well. So, so on the variances side, I think I'm going in order. It might not make sense, but I'm going through here.
I didn't make sense either, so.
What's that?
My order didn't necessarily make sense either,
Okay.
so that makes the others.
So in the variances, I think I covered most of them. Basically, we see that there's impervious cover. Even though we're greatly reducing the impervious on property, then there's the drive aisle that exists today exists too close to a residential homeowner. That's a 50-foot setback. It's down to 25. There's a 25-foot buffer along that same perimeter, and so we'll have that same chain link fence in that, and in the past with Tredyffrin, we've needed a variance for that buffer. Off the top of my head, that's the most of them, but so it's really related to fencing and impervious cover, and the typical buffer one that we have to get on most of our properties. The parking exceeds code, and we see that the ability to utilize the existing lot, and Mr. Hagedorn has pulled up this slide here to assist me here. So you can see the parking lots are largely the same, but yet you'll see smaller on the right-hand side of that plan, and then obviously the rear. So yes, we will have no issue meeting code for parking. And in terms of the traffic evaluation, a school and an office actually kind of work very kind of collaboratively, where the difference is a school actually has less cars coming in the morning than an office would in the peak, but they turn around and leave, right? So there's more cars leaving. So but they're not conflicting with anybody as they leave. So in fact, the driveway as it's designed can handle the in and out of that school very well in the collaboration of the office park that it's in. We will obviously have to do a traffic impact study, but we don't see there being any off-site improvements that would be required. I think that's the clarification to what Mr. Hagedorn was talking about. Specifically, sidewalks and crosswalks wouldn't be applicable here since there really isn't any walkable neighborhoods to this school. So it wouldn't be really kind of designed for walkers. It would be more for, for the buses and for cars. And then you talked about emergency access on Howville. So there is an emergency access on Howville, which will absolutely be maintained as part of our designs. And that emergency access on Howville, and Howville is a township road, not a state road. So we can maintain the access way onto Howville by but again, not including PennDOT in that since it's a township road.
Okay, thank you.
How'd I do?
All right. You did well, as usual, Mike.
Thank you. Next person up for comment is Maura Redmond.
Hi, Tredyffrin. So a couple of questions. Do you know what species of turtle is on site? I'm aware that there are turtles in that pond. My concern being that the bog turtle is a protected species. Can you speak to the bird issue that you mentioned in the beginning? If the pond is covered, does that remove the liner? Closer? Okay, I was hearing feedback. Okay, you want start over? Okay, all right.
You'd like expansion on turtles and birds,
Okay.
right?
Do you know what species of turtle is on site? And I'm concerned because the bog turtle is a protected species. And can you speak to the bird issue you mentioned in the beginning? If the pond is covered, does that remove the liner issue? When will the redistricting process begin when construction begins? And how does the larger gym proposal fit in with the concept of parity between the elementary schools?
Okay. We'll turn to the folks to answer some of those questions?
Yes.
Let's
Sure.
start with the turtles and the birds.
Yeah. So, so the PNDI that we did not come back with bog turtle habitat. So there was no hit for that. I would assume that they'd be box turtles or whatever, but we do have more work to do there. The bird hit was for blue herons. So not an endangered species, but a protected habitat while they're nesting. So what that would do is it impact the time of year that we could remove the pond in that situation. It was turtles, and then birds was blue herons, and then the liner issue. Yes, we would, if we were to replace it with an underground basin, that would eliminate the need to replace that liner. And what we would take the benefit of doing it is a detention system built in the 90s has much different characteristics and goals than one today. So we could actually make that basin more state of the art.
I can speak to the timeline, and it isn't a definitive answer, but what I can say is that you'll hear more specifics about this later. So the timeline that Mr. Heckendorn presented is really a construction timeline. And there are a lot of operational things that will also need to be decided. Redistricting, the development of a full-day kindergarten program. At the same time, some of you know we have to implement new science steels standards. That's going to affect our elementary programming. We're going to have to staff that school. We're going to have to figure out how new parent organizations can be formed. There's a lot of work to be done, and we have already done some work on those timelines. If we get to closing of the building, between closing on this property and the end of the year in public meetings, our plan would be to share more details about those specific timelines. At this point, premature to closing, and with there being consideration of extending due diligence or other things that may need to take place, we want to wait to get to closing, and then we'll share more information about that. Jim Parody.
So in terms of the differential of gymnasium sizing, that's something that I would expect as we go through a more thorough evaluation associated with the potential costs of that. Certainly providing a middle school gym at the 6th Elementary School at 1200 Swedesford Road represents something different than what exists in the other elementary schools. So I think that would be a topic of discussion during the process of making that decision.
But another consideration is as well, we can't do with the height a cafetorium inside the envelope. If we wanted a cafetorium like the other elementary schools, that would have to be outside the existing envelope. That would add cost. So the fact that this gym already will be different because it will be a gymnatorium, which might also suggest a reasonable call for some extra space. And that's where their special events will take place that require a stage, unlike the elementary schools, the other 5.
Thank you, Ms. Redmond. And to that parity question, you heard some of the discussion here even at the outset about the possibility of a middle school gym and some views about saying, well, we should have an elementary school-sized gym, or maybe we should take advantage. And I believe, I'm confident that the board will be discussing those very issues as we get to the timeline where we need to make a decision about whether it's going to be a middle school-sized gymnatorium or an elementary school-sized gymnatorium. So thank you. Okay, so next on the list is Amanda Wallach. And just so maybe you all know who's next on the list, but it's Aubrey Dirks, I believe is how to pronounce the last name, and then Carol Clark.
Hi, Amanda Wallach, Easttown. I always enjoy these presentations. It's very eye-opening. I'm here to speak on the fact of the difference in the schools, as in you're planning for more space, which means this school is going to be bigger and better than the other 4, which means the equality as far as where to go for indoor activity is going to be much different in this school versus the other schools. So how are we going to close that disparity gap? I have brought up at prior facility meetings, just between the elementary or between the middle schools, which we worked on something, so thank you. My daughter's super happy. But we have a very small plot of turf at Beaumont Elementary. We installed one at Devon when I was there before we got redistricted. But when it rains and it's muddy, these kids have a very small area where I feel like this school, because it has a bigger envelope, you have that third floor empty space, it seems like they're going to have more of an opportunity to be able to play and run around versus the other 5 schools. And where does the revenue go for the facilities when we rent things like the gymnasiums and stuff like that? Does that money that we get back, like could it offset some of the costs long term? And I am for something bigger because if we're already there, this school is a 2024 school. It is not a 1956 school like the rest of ours. So as far as the gymnasium is concerned, are we using our district as the kind of comparison window, like our elementary schools? Or are we using what a new elementary school, because I know we've built a few kind of in and around the area, are their sizing to the newer standards? Because, obviously 1956, we had a lot less people, and now we have a gajillion million people. And I had something else, but I forgot when I was sitting by the tree, so I'll email. That's it.
Thank you.
Parity among our schools is always a challenge because we want to provide as similar of an experience as we can, and regardless of the elementary school that you attend within the district. I think that there are some things that we do have in place that actually put us ahead on the parity scale than of a lot of other places. We do have a common blueprint. I know a lot of the superintendents I talk to, their elementary schools operate on different schedules as we had, a while back until we moved sort of towards some level of standardization. So a challenge will be we cannot have 6 identical elementary schools to each other. Some are already built. Some will have inherent they're on a busier road than another one, or one is right across from a police station, and I would like my child's school to be right across from a police station, and we can't have all of our schools right at that close. So what we do is regularly study these things, and if there's a disparity discovered between one school where we feel that the experience is being received by those students could stand some improvement compared to the rest, we bring that forward as a concern to the board. If there's a facilities improvement or programming change or staffing addition, to try to keep them as relatively comparable as possible. But certainly they're not going to be identical, and as you pointed out, this will be a 2024 school. It will be bigger. I would think that it wouldn't be better than all the other schools. I think it would be comparable to all the other schools. That would be our goal. And as far as the revenue, it goes to the general fund.
Right, all the facility rental revenue goes into the general fund, and we actually talked about it the other night at the budget workshop.
Thank you. Sure, come on up. Before you ask though, come on up and get back up here. But while you're walking up, there was also a reference to potentially using the shell space for additional space for the kids, and so I just want to clarify what you mean by shell space.
The shell space at the moment will be undeveloped, right? Where we're largely not going to spend resources developing. The hallway will end. And behind that, at the moment, a first use would be storage. You never have enough closets, right? And there's always things we need to store in that school that we could use. There's a service elevator in place already that we could move up and potentially have some extra storage space. I don't know that it wouldn't be developed. It wouldn't have the HVAC ventilation. It wouldn't be designed to hold students, but more be an in and out space. I think of it as an expansion bay, because right now when we talk about the idea of maybe trying to look at a modular classroom, we could potentially add a classroom in that space. Or if there's a special program that emerges that we want to house in that building, we could do that without taking spaces in the other schools, and we can convert that space more long-term. But originally as shell space, it would be undeveloped, and for all intents and purposes, the use of the school would end for the students outside of the shell space.
Question is, I know it's not a very residential area, but are there any residents within that, not in our envelope, I guess, whatever, near it? Because I know in Easttown, our residents love to shoot things down when they don't like it. So I was just curious, because I know they have a different, my understanding, unless it's different in Tredyffrin than it is in Easttown, that people are if they're within a certain footage or within I don't know, like 0.25 miles or something, that they can legally fight against you. Now, don't quote me on this, I'm going back to some other stuff, but I wasn't sure if that was something.
There's a handful of residential properties that are accessed from Howville Road. They really front onto essentially the east side of Howville Road whenever it gets close to Sweetsford. There's really just a handful. Some of those residents did attend the January 17th open house, so there's been an attempt to communicate with them. There hasn't been anything expressed thus far as a hesitancy from the residents that have vocalized anything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go with Mr. Dirks.
I'm Aubrey Dirks. I live in Easttown, and I'm here with a lollipop for you. No tax questions, well, actually, it is a revenue issue, I guess, because I represent the Paoli Wildcats. I'm the head of the organization, and we are a major contributor to the general fund because we rent every gym you have. And the only thing that prevents us from having more kids play basketball is gym space. And the biggest piece to that is usable gym space. The elementary schools that we have now, for the most part, aren't usable because the rims are too high, the spaces are too small. You can only get one team in there to practice. You can't use them for games. So to use it as a middle school sized gym would be a tremendous asset. So the Wildcats, how many kids do we have? Roughly a quarter of the middle school population plays Wildcats basketball. We had 540 kids playing basketball this year and wait lists for every division. Next year, come to one of our games, you're going to see the most diverse group of kids you've ever seen. And when you consider there's only 20 on the floor with the two teams, that's saying something. So I'm just up here to say, please consider the middle school sized gym. Should that be something worth considering? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dirks. And our last commenter of the evening will be Ms. Carol Clark.
Hi there, Carol Clark from Tredyffrin. First of all, thank you very much for all the work you've done on this and continuing to keep and reach out to the public to come. I hope a lot of people are watching this. You can stop watching it now at home. Two quick questions and then a comment. One is, I am assuming that the kindergarten rooms that we're building, there's going to be enough on that first floor if we go to full day kindergarten, because we need twice as many kindergarten rooms at that point. So I'm assuming the calculations have all been done so that that's laid out in that first floor plan. If not, please correct the record for me. The second question, I'm dreaming here a little bit. Do we have any wiggle room in the price for the property? Doing the due diligence, we've learned some very useful facts. The HVAC has a limited lifespan right now. Anyone going in would have to put in very soon, a couple million for the current HVAC system if it was a business. The other was dealing with the liner that's only good for another year or so. Anyone going in would have to probably replace that liner and they'd be faced with, who knows, maybe close to $1 million. I have no idea about this. But is there any wiggle room at all to go back and say, hey, we've done our due diligence, we found these things. Is there any way you can reduce that or reduce the price? So I'll come back to that. Also, there was an idea I had before, it probably isn't valid, but it's worth putting out there. Is there any way that the seller would want to make some sort of a donation to the township, or excuse me, to the school system by reducing the price and doing that as a write-off if they can use that on their taxes in any way? I don't know how large the corporation is that owns this. If they sold it to just another corporation, it would be a deal. But if you're selling it to a school system, maybe there's something that they could, if they reduce the cost, what have you, that savings somehow might be worked in as a benefit to their taxes. Food for thought. I am very excited about this school. I am thrilled. It looks fabulous. And then you put up the financials, and a wet blanket just went right over it for me. I'm doing the calculations and trying to, how do we justify the movement that we've made from the first, and it was, 2 years ago, 55 million, okay, we're looking at the different projects and what it would take. We've gotten a little bit more realistic. We're up to in the 60 million category, and now we're up to 70, and we're adding on an additional 6 million for the HVAC, which we basically have to do, and it's some other costs. So we're adding on top of all that, another 10% increase in costs versus the other sites that we already own the land. If I were on the school board, I would have quite a challenge, I think, ahead of me saying, okay, taxpayers, not only are we asking you, and we're already increasing taxes significantly so we can pay for this new school wherever it's going to be, another 10% on top of that cost, I have to make sure I can justify that additional expense before I can approve this. So good luck with that. The more we hear about, hey, this school will be a little bit larger with 30 versus the 26 rooms, and we're already fixing it so that we can do these things, yay, Paoli Wildcats, that, hey, there's some value. Let's do a cost-benefit analysis when it's the right time to decide what sort of revenues could we realistically expect from a larger gym, and what are the revenues we could get off of that to help us justify it, and any opportunities that we have to say, respecting parity, but saying, hey, this is going to be, it's worth the extra costs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'll turn and to see if we have some answers to some of the questions.
I can confirm that the number of classrooms figured is based on full-day kindergarten. And it's a challenge, right, because we have half-day kindergarten. The question is, how do you know how many you're going to have for full-day kindergarten? And we don't, but a good estimate is looking at our first grade. If we assume that those people, there are people in the schools who sent their children to a full-day kindergarten program of their own, we know our enrollment grows from kindergarten to first grade by about 29%. So it's a fair assumption to plan for first grade. Typically in the current schools, we have anywhere between 4, there might even be, occasionally there's an odd 3, but 4, 5, or 6 sections. When we smooth that out through redistricting, we could reasonably expect 4 or 5 sections per grade, and that bears out in the planning for the grades on the floor plan at each level. Mr. Roos, I don't know when you want to talk about the negotiations part.
Yes, and hopefully I hope everyone can appreciate that the board is simply not in a position to discuss any aspect of the negotiation publicly or to respond to a question about the negotiations other than what I'm doing right now. It's not good practice, and we're precluded to doing so by the purchase sale agreement in any event. Didn't want anybody to expect a response to a comment about negotiation or suggestion about negotiation.
And I think Ms. Clark had one comment related to the additional costs associated with HVAC and talked about the $6 million level. And I know what the answer is, but maybe you guys who are doing the technical can clarify that.
For clarification purposes, the base concept design included a variable refrigerant flow, a VRF HVAC system. That addressed filtration. That sort of system would address acoustics, and that sort of system is embodied in the $69.2 million project budget. That other $6 million system is simply an acknowledgement that there are higher performance HVAC systems, which, given the magnitude of the project, makes sense to evaluate from a life cycle standpoint. That's certainly not a recommendation. That's simply an acknowledgement that that is one of several options that will be investigated moving forward if the project continues its current trajectory from a cost-benefit analysis.
And again, to remember, we've had 60 days of due diligence to refine this price, and we have not applied all those standards to the prices at Berwyn Avenue or Jefferson Lane. Members of the public asked if you've built in costs for inflators that might happen when you go for township approvals. So at least from a location, it appears that fewer variances and waivers would be needed to use this property than the Jefferson Lane property or the First Avenue Berwyn property. But for example, in the estimate that you see there, do we have to widen Jefferson Lane all the way out to Chesterbrook Boulevard? Would we have to pay for a traffic light? Would we have to put a sidewalk all the way out there? That's not built into any of those costs. So if we had gone through the same process with either of those other two properties, there's a range from high to low, and we'd have gotten a finer point on that. But of course, we're not going to put the resources into doing that for those others. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars and time of experts to be able to get a theoretical cost. But that's absent from the first two estimates and more present in the one we've presented tonight for 1200 West Sweetsford.
Thank you, Dr. Gusick, and thank you, Mr. Hechendorn. So, seeing no further commenters on my list, we will continue with board discussion on the resolution and a vote. I know that Dr. Allen wished to speak, so while we have her on the phone, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Allen.
So thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great, wonderful. I wanted to thank the resident who mentioned that, our goal is to build a 21st century school, not a 20th century school, but have the same level of excellence as all our other schools. So I appreciate that comment. I also wanted to just say that I support the idea of a larger gym, especially given the size of the elementary school, and also considering the economies of scale. To me, it just makes more sense to expand the gym now rather than a potential, addition later should the district grow. To me, it just makes it's a more efficient approach in the long run. And so those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. I will turn to my left, see if we have any additional comments or questions from the board. Yes, Dr. Hatinsky.
Yes, I just wanted to thank everybody again for your comments, and also just express that we've gotten comments as we've gone along, and this has been a long process. And I think we did hear a lot of interest in this reusing of a commercial property, and I think a lot of people expected it was going to be substantially cheaper. So that was something that has come out, though. We've had discussion about that in a couple board meetings now, where we've been clear about the prices, and I think the public has had time to hear about that, and still most of the feedback we've gotten, that I've gotten personally and the board has gotten, has been positive about people thinking this is a good idea for all of the reasons that Mr. Hechendorn outlined, and so I personally think it's worth the investment, even though it's not going to be substantially cheaper. I still think it's going to be the best option for a school, given the limitations and complications with the other sites. So I just wanted to get that out there. I also wanted to just say, in regards to the gym, I also think I am sensitive to the issue of parity, and that we like to have our schools be similar. I think Dr. Gusick, your statement about the use of it as a gymatorium, making it different, was something I hadn't quite thought about before. And I think I'm leaning, we don't have to make the decision tonight, but I just wanted to say that I'm leaning toward that, just because, as Mrs. Clark said, and we all know, it's a big investment for the community, and I think if we can make it more useful for the community as a resource, that's something I'd be interested in. So, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Hatinsky. Any other comments or questions on my left? How about to my right? Ms. Piccioni.
You may recall that I voted no for this location, the lone dissenter, and the reason is because I feel that the Jefferson Lane property, which was deeded to us for $1, is now a wasted resource that we can't do anything other than build a school for. Also, I knew that the due diligence needed to be done, and so I would rather have the costs plowed into the due diligence for Jefferson Lane. The second consideration for why I voted no was because by purchasing a commercial property, we are removing from the township's tax-based inventory. It will now be no longer a tax entity. However, now that we have done diligence for this plan, we've spent the money, we've spent the time, we've had the resources, the professionals take care of that, and also the very well done plan. The concept design is excellent and the location is excellent. So in for a penny, in for a pound, the majority voted for it, so I'm going to vote to approve this resolution.
Thank you, Ms. Piccioni. Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, well, I would just want to reiterate again our thanks for the effort that you guys have undertaken these past 60 days. I hope that the community appreciates the amount of work and time that it took to be able to get to this stage in a short period of time, to be able to describe, not just to the board, but to the public, the potential of this site and some of the potential issues associated with this site that will affect our process as we move forward in this effort to evaluate the need and the implementation of potentially a new elementary school building for our district. The first one, as somebody noted, since 1965. So it's a new ground for all of us. With that, board discussion has come to a close. I will now call for a vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, signify by saying nay. Hearing none, the ayes have it, 9-0. What'd you do, Sue?
I don't know. I think I might have.
Is she calling in?
I don't, maybe she's calling me. Oh, I'm afraid to do that. Dr. Allen? We've lost Dr. Allen, I'm sorry.
We seem to have lost Dr. Allen. So
We can call her.
hold, please.
Does Mike have the number? Yeah.
I'm going to have to ask Mr. Roos this. I do have a text message from Dr. Allen of a yes vote. Does that count?
No, we can't. The public comment period is closed. You can ask it. You can ask it offline after. You can ask it offline afterwards. I'll hang around. You can ask.
Dr. Allen, we just need to record your vote.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have a 9-0.
Thank you.
Now we vote passes 9-0. We did have a question here about clarification of what the resolution was. The resolution is in the packet, and I referenced it at the outset of the meeting, so I'm not going to read it.
The resolution states that the board has delegated to the superintendent the authority to either terminate or the agreement if the conditions aren't met, or to extend the due diligence period if the conditions can be met, but simply not met by 5 o'clock on March 18th. So the authority is open-ended.
Okay. With that clarification, this is the point in the meeting when we make any announcements required by the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act. Our solicitor this evening is Ken Roos, and he will make any required announcements.
Yes, the board met in executive session on March 6th, and again tonight, March 13th, regarding, executive session regarding the acquisition of this property. And also personnel matters.
Thank you. Announcement of future meetings. Next meeting, Monday, March 18th, 2024, regular board meeting, 7:30 p.m., Conestoga High School. Monday, March 8th, 2024, budget workshop 2, 7:30, where we'll be discussing.
April.
Oh, April, that's right. If I could read, I would say April. Monday, April 8th, 2024, budget workshop 2, 7:30 p.m. at Conestoga High School. Next meeting, Monday, April 29, 2024, regular board meeting, 7:30 p.m. at Conestoga High School. With that, we've reached the best part of the meeting, the adjournment section. I will call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Ayes have it, 9-0. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for attending.